Dear members and friends of Na Bolom.Ch, I am Nuria Fonte de Berlioz, President of the Swiss Cultural Association Na Bolom.Ch. Our association was created on July 7, 2013, with the aim of promoting the environmentalist and humanist legacy of the Mexican-Swiss Gertrude Duby Blom, better known as Trudy, who was born on July 7, 1901 in Innertkirchen, Canton of Bern, and died in December 23, 1993 in San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas. Trudy was not only a journalist, a social anthropologist, and a documentary photographer, but also one of the first environmental activists of the 20th century, and received from the United Nations Environment Programme UNEP in 1991 the award of the first woman ecologist in the Americas. Following her example, and in an effort to expand environmental awareness in both Mexico and Switzerland, we have invited Her Excellency Mrs. Cecilia Jaber, Ambassador of Mexico to Switzerland, to give us a talk on the environmental situation in Mexico. On behalf of the Executive Committee of Na Bolom.Ch, I would like to thank her for having accepted our invitation, and I now invite you, dear members and friends, to listen to her interesting talk on the mentioned issue. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I am Cecilia Jaber, Ambassador of Mexico to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and it is a pleasure for me to participate today in this important celebration of the International Day of the Biological Diversity 2022, thanks to the kind invitation of the Na Bolom Cultural Association. Please let me start with a word of recognition of the Na Bolom Association's vital work in protecting the environment, and this is most relevant for me as their generous labor in favor of the natural wealth and heritage started with the impressive life and work of Gertrude Blom, who spent a good part of her life in one of the richest regions in terms of nature in Mexico, the state of Chiapas. The exuberance of the environment and the complex culture of the Mayan region inspired the Swiss social anthropologist to dedicate her work and life to the protection and preservation of nature. I salute her legacy. Indeed, Mexico has been classified, along with the select group of countries, as a mega-diverse territory, as it is the fourth country in the world to possess an impressive amount of overall species, and it's also the second in ecosystems that include wetlands, coastlines, seas and oceans, forests, jungles, deserts and mountains. It is also home to about 12% of all known species, reptiles, mammals, amphibians, and plants. This is why promoting national development and economic progress while also preserving the country's environment and biodiversity represents an enormous challenge for the Mexican government. It is committed to implementing nature and wildlife conservation policies and making use of the country's natural resources in a sustainable way. For this purpose, Mexico has engaged in collective efforts at the international stage, most notably through the United Nations system, to ensure that the world's biological diversity and resources are preserved for the generations to come. Among the most important initiatives, the Mexican government signed as party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, the first legally binding international treaty by which countries have committed to develop national strategies for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. Mexico ratified ratified this convention on March 11, 1993, and since then, it has continued to work for its strengthening. Just to mention a few paths of action, Mexico fully participates in the international efforts to establish a new global strategy to stop biodiversity loss by 2030 and live in harmony with nature by 2050, with the sustainable use of the world's natural resources through the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In this process, Mexican state and municipal governments, as well as representatives of the Secretariat of Environment and Natural Resources, the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs, and the National Commission for Biodiversity are active participants. The Mexican government acknowledged the importance of biodiversity to achieve food security, reduce poverty, and foster inclusive and equitable development, and therefore it also actively promotes projects and strategies that can contribute to the advancement of the three agendas of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio+20, biodiversity, climate change, and desertification within the post-COVID-19 world context. At the national level, Mexico has a robust legal framework for the protection of the environment and its biodiversity, with the General Law on Ecological Equilibrium and Environmental Protection of 1988 at its core. On the same line, Mexico counts with a vigorous legislation on matters of vital importance, such as national waters, wildlife, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, management of waste, climate change, environmental liability, sustainable forest development, to name a few. In the last decades, the Mexican government has implemented specific programs and strategies to protect the country's biodiversity, focusing on both species and ecosystems, and which have concrete objectives such as the protection, recovery, reproduction, repopulation, rescue, shelter, exhibition, environmental education, and sustainable use, among others. There has also been an important growth in the number of protected natural areas in Mexico. Currently, there are 184 of these sites, which represent over 90 million hectares of the national territory, according to the National Commission of Protected Natural Areas, and include biosphere reserves, national parks, natural monuments, areas for the protection of flora and fauna, areas for the protection of natural resources, and sanctuaries. The federal government works closely with other actors to mainstream conservation efforts and the sustainable use of biodiversity, working hand in hand with state and local governments. Their programs and strategies are essential for the success of the nation's environment and biodiversity conservation goals and the achievement of its international commitments. One relevant example is the fight to eradicate pollution with plastics, a problem that heavily impacts the environment and its wildlife. Additionally, many states' governments, in conjunction with the private sector, have implemented significant actions, such as campaigns to promote manufacturing of recyclable products, awareness and educational campaigns to incentivize a change in habits, strengthening of the regulatory frame in the industry sector, and fostering the development and implementation of new technologies in waste management. More recently, under the leadership of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Mexico is moving towards a national policy of zero waste. This approach has a strong emphasis on social justice, paying particular attention to vulnerable populations, and involves municipal governments and citizen participation. With this, the Mexican government aims to establish a sustainable regional model for the management of urban solid waste. I could elaborate much further on the substantial efforts that Mexico has undertaken in order to protect and preserve our most precious heritage. Let me just say that this task involves each one of us, and in this brief presentation, I just wanted to highlight the importance that the government of Mexico places on this matter, which represents one of its priority concerns and areas of action both within its domestic and foreign policies. Thank you for listening, and let's all work together to protect our planet.